William Walker Atkinson's The New Psychology, Its Message, Principles, and Practice. Chapter 1 was The New Psychology. This is Chapter 2, The Ego, or Self. The old treatises on psychology generally began with a consideration of the nature of mind. Some authorities held to the metaphysical conception of the immaterial nature of mind, while others held that mind was a product or manifestation of the brain, and therefore was material in nature. But the new psychology has preferred to leave this discussion in the hands of the teachers or other branches of philosophy and science, particularly as the old psychologists almost invariably concluded the discussion by the admission that mind, in its ultimate nature, was unknowable. The later writers have agreed with the writer who said that psychology is no more bound to begin by telling what mind is than physics is obliged to start by settling the vexed question as to what matter is. And as physics is concerned only with the phenomena of matter, so is the new conception of psychology concerned only with the phenomena of mind. We have thought that the logical requirements of the case indicated that we should begin our consideration of the general subject of the new psychology by an examination of the subject of the ego or self, which we find at the center of all conscious mental action, and, in a way, at the center of all unconscious mental action. To consider the ego, or self, from a purely scientific and psychological viewpoint is a somewhat difficult undertaking, particularly as the special subject is generally considered to belong to the field of metaphysics or philosophy, into which field we have announced our intention to avoid trespassing. But we think that there is a way of regarding the ego, or self, from a strictly psychological position and viewpoint, and to this consideration we now invite you. All intelligent persons make use of the mental concept of I, of that individual consciousness which is the thinker of the thought, the feeler of the feeling, the actor of the act, the willer of the deed. All attempts to define or explain the nature of this I must fail. It is a something that cannot be explained and is known only by its own presence in consciousness. At the last, our consciousness reports that it is, without informing us why, how, or what it is. Think as we will, we are inevitably brought back to this position, just where we started. The I is, and nothing more. To every conscious individual, there is always a perception of the I in the consciousness of I am. In every thought, feeling, and a manifestation of will, there is always this consciousness of I am in the individual. It is always I think, or I feel, or I will. Always the I behind the mental state, and to which every feeling is referred, which participates in every thought, and from which emanates every effort of the will. Every reference to a mental state within us brings us to a realization of the presence of this I. With every individual, it is always I am. The individual can never truthfully say I am not. This I, which is the knower, the actor, the thinker, the seer, the doer. It is the essence of each and every mental state. To many persons, the perception of the I, or ego, or self, is very clear and distinct. But to others, it is more or less involved in the consciousness of the secondary I, the subordinate self, the alter ego, or the me. As Professor William James calls it, perhaps the best way to enable the student to distinguish the me from the I will be to consider the latter at first, and then to lead him to consider and recognize the true ego, or I. The distinction is somewhat subtle, but a little consideration will reveal it to you. The essential difference is that the I is the something that knows, feels, and wills, while the me is the part of the self that is known to the I as mental states, feelings, thoughts, and will impulses. A man's body and physical sensations, etc., are a part of this me, which may be examined, considered, and ruled by his I. His feelings, pains, pleasures, prejudices, opinions, inclinations, and the rest of the mental things that he considers to be part of himself are all portions of the me, for all of them may be examined, changed, and ruled by the I. The me, in all its parts and phases, is always the object of contemplation by the I. That is, that toward which the powers of the I are extended. And the I is always the subject of its contemplation of the things of the me. That is, that which is the essence of the contemplation. Let us consider a few examples in order to understand this a little more clearly. You see a thing. There are three phases of the seeing, namely, number one, the thing seen, which is something outside of both the I and the me. Number two, the mental operation known as sight, which belongs to the me. And then number three, the something that sees, which is the I. This same rule applies to all of the five senses. This is the simplest example. We have others, more complex and subtle, before us. We experience the feeling arising from some emotional activity. There are three phases of this feeling, namely, one, the outside thing from which the emotion arises. Number two, the emotion felt, which belongs to the me, for it comes from within our being. And three, the feeler of the emotion or feeling. That something that experiences it, which is the I. We think a thought. There are three phases to this also. To wit, those being, number one, the outer object of the thought. Two, the thought itself, which belongs to the me. And three, the thinker, which is the I. Leaving out of consideration the outside thing which causes the sense impression, the emotional feeling, or the thought, we have two aspects of mental activity to deal with. One, the mental activity itself, and two, the I, which is always the knower of the mental activity. The mental activity is the object, and the I is the subject of consciousness. These two elements are always present in thought and feeling, in all conscious mental activity. They are opposites, the two ends of the mental stick. We may carefully examine a thought or feeling and see it in all of its aspects. But who or what is it that examines and sees it? The I. We may decide to accept or reject certain ideas, feelings, or thoughts, and we recognize the power in ourselves to do this to a greater or lesser degree. But what is this something which feels that it can change or govern the idea, thought, or feeling, which knows that it may choose to do this or that, to will to do or not to do? The I. This idea is the self, the master. We cannot escape from it. It is the essence of all that is individual in us. This I is what psychologists have called the pure ego. It is the something that is always present in consciousness as that which is conscious, while the me is simply a bundle of states of consciousness, or things of which the I is conscious. The I is the thinker, the knower, the feeler, the actor. The me is constantly changing. The me of today is different from the me of yesterday, and the latter different from the me of the day before, and yet the I is always the same. Always the I. For other than itself, it cannot be. And just what is this I? We cannot tell. This riddle has never been solved by the mind of man. So subtle is the essence of the I that it is almost impossible to think of it as a something apart from the mental states of the me. All that can be said of it is that it is. Its only report of itself is, I am. Is what? I am what? You cannot answer these questions unless you bring in the attributes and qualities of the me. For in one sense, the I is nothing without these qualities. And yet, a very advanced thinker has learned to recognize the I am report of the self as distinct from the qualities of the me. You cannot examine the I by the eye. You must have an object for your subject. And if you make the I your object, then you have no subject to examine it. You place the I under the mental microscope to examine it, and lo, you have nothing to look through the glass. The I is at the wrong end of the glass. You cannot even consider the I in imagination. You may imagine your body or your mental states, thoughts, feelings, sense impressions, ideas, or actions. These belong to the me and are objective in nature. But the moment you begin to try to imagine the I, you find that you cannot get outside of yourself in order to examine yourself. You cannot be at both ends of the glass at the same time. You cannot both bat. You cannot be both bat and ball at the same time. Try as you may, you will find that you cannot stand aside and examine the I as you have found that you can do with the me. You have found a final, ultimate something within yourself that defies your powers of analysis or examination. You demand of yourself the answer of your inner nature, and your answer to yourself is simply, I am. Further than this you cannot say, without going outside of yourself into the me. There are several things, however, that you may learn about the I by a negative process of exclusion. You may find that you are not able to think of your I as not being. You can never say, I am not, nor can you even imagine yourself as not being. So long as you think of yourself, the I, at all, you must accompany the thought with the consciousness of being. You cannot even imagine yourself out of existence. That is, while you may imagine another I as not being, or even imagine your own I as fading into nothingness in an abstract way, a little analysis will show you that in the latter instance you are not thinking of your I at all, but of an abstract something, not yourself at all. For while you are thinking this abstract something out of existence, you will find a consciousness of the I seeing that something else fading away. It cannot so think of itself. Nor can you imagine yourself as being any other I than what it is. You may think of it surrounded with other me aspects or objects, personalities and environments, but you can never think of your I as being another I. The consciousness of the I is above personality. It is something inseparable from individuality. We might pursue this consideration much further, but we're approaching too nearly the thin dividing line between psychology and metaphysics. The consciousness of the I is an actual experience, just as much as is the consciousness of the page before you, and therefore is a fit subject for psychological notice. We have called your attention to it in a somewhat unusual way, for we hold that the whole subject of the new psychology is bound up with this recognition of the I, that it revolves around this I as a wheel around its center. We regard all of the mental faculties, powers, organs, qualities, and modes of expression as merely instruments, tools, or channels of expression of this wonderful something, the self, the pure ego, the I. And this is the message of the new psychology, that you, the I, have at your command a wonderful array of mental instruments, tools, machinery, which, if properly used, may create for yourself any kind of personality you may desire. You are the master workman, who may make of yourself what you will. But before you can appreciate this truth, before you can make it your own, before you can apply it, you must enter into a recognition and a realization of this wonderful I that you are, to which body and the senses, yea, even the mind itself, are but channels of expression. You are something more than body, or senses, or mind. You are that wonderful something, master of all these things, but of which you can say but one thing: I am. Chapter 3 will be egoism, not egotism.